إن الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Um, we usually have different streams on different issues, and because this is our people of the God, our people of the book, sorry, we have something today which is more than what we usually go through. Usually we have Christian concepts on, but this time we have a brother who's done a lot of work on Judaism. And the brother Ibrahim today from Proving Islam has brought us work on Judaism, on exposing Judaism, the shirk of Judaism, which is something we don't hear much about. Most of us are mainly geared towards Christianity and whatever. We will learn something new from this brother today, because not all of us, we do know from the Quran that there has been a lot of shirk in Judaism, but what extent, we don't know about it. We don't know the amount. So this brother is going to show us today, Brother Ibrahim. So, Brother Ibrahim, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And can you give us a little introduction of yourself, and then explain to us what you have brought for us, because this seems something very interesting and something new to a lot of us, because like even me, I've got knowledge in Judaism, but not to this extent. So I'm sure this is going to be very interesting, and we'll have a good stream of this, inshallah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa maghfirah. Right. So again, my name is Ibrahim. I have a channel called Proving Islam, where I talk about a variety of topics. And one of the main ones I talk about is this idea of Judaism, right? Because there's not a lot of da'wah to Jews. So a lot of actually the things we're going to discuss are spoken about in the Quran. So there are a lot of ayat which actually apply here.
Right.
And I guess I want to start by speaking about the concept of God in Judaism. So this wouldn't be what you would call shirk, but like blasphemies and this and that, right? So let's just waste no time. Let's just get into it, right?
Right. We tend to have the perception that, like, Christianity has much more shirk and much more wrong with it. We tend to think that, like, we have so much closeness to Judaism that we don't expect, like, the extent that this brother is going to go into. So inshallah, like, brother's going to give us information that he has done research on, and I hope this is going to be beneficial to you, because most of my streams that I do is to inform people, to educate, and to train da'is as well. So inshallah, go ahead, brother.
Right. So let's begin with the concept of God in Judaism. So they have a lot of these sort of blasphemous ways they speak about Allah, and this sort of hinted towards in the Quran as well, because we have a couple of these ayat. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ. The Jews say the hand of Allah is chained, and then لَقَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَقِيرٌ وَنَحْنُ أَغْنِيَاءٌ. Allah has certainly heard the statement of those who say that Allah is poor while we are rich, right? So this sort of idea is in the Quran, where the Jews will constantly blaspheme God. And we have a lot of this in their text. So let's begin with the Talmud, Avoda Zarah 3b. I'm not going to read everything out for the stream, because then it'd be too long, but I will sort of paraphrase it. And then if you want to look at my screen, the references are right there. So Avoda Zarah 3b speaks about what does God do in his day. So they mentioned there are 12 hours in the day, and during the first 3, the Holy One, blessed be he, sits and engages in Torah study. So the first problem here is God authored the Torah.
Brother, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. There's a few, most of the things that the brother's going through, you probably won't find it in the Torah. So when you're engaging with Christians and everything, like, if you mention anything of this to them, they probably won't believe it, because they don't believe in the Talmud and everything. This is mainly things that, like, the Jews would believe in, and you might not find any of this in the Torah itself. So if you're going to open the Torah, the Tanakh or whatever, much of this you will not find it in there. This is the books. This is the Talmud and the oral tradition that has been written down, that the brother's gone and done research on there. So
Jews will hold the Talmud and this and that, Zohar and Talmud, just as importantly as they would the Bible.
Right.
So they say that there were 2 Torahs given.
Right.
And it's not that one is more important than the other. Actually, the hint is, and it's even explicitly stated in the Talmud, that the study of the Talmud is better and more important than the study of the Bible. Yeah, so actually, if anything, they'll give more weight to what they call as the oral Torah. So this is a lot of this does not apply to Christians, only Jews.
Yeah.
But anyway, so with that out of the way, the first thing I pointed out here is that for 3 hours a day, God sits and engages in Torah study. Why is God studying his own book? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
The next thing they mention here is another thing he does for 3 hours a day. He sits and makes sport with the Leviathan. What is the Leviathan? It's like this mythical sea creature, which the Bible says God created. Okay, so now they mention here God plays essentially for 3 hours with this mythical sea creature. So saying God plays. Then they say here that at night, what does God do? So they have a few different ideas of what God might do at night. One of the things they say is that he rides on his light cherub and flies to 18,000 different worlds. So he has this little cherub and he rides it and he visits all these 18,000 different worlds. Another thing he does at night, he sits and listens to the songs from the angels. So the angels sing songs to him and he sits there and he listens. We go to Barakot 7a. Another problem is mentioned. It's mentioned how the Holy One, blessed be He, which is God, he wears phylacteries. So these are tefillin. So what are these? These are, the black cubes that Jews wear on their foreheads.
Can I just ask you a question here now, right? God is supposed to have revealed the oral tradition to them. Is this, according to them, God has revealed this to them, that he plays and he does whatever, he flies on the angels or whatever, or is their interpretation of it? Because if they're claiming that God reveals this to them, then obviously they've changed God to something totally different here, because according to the Torah, it seems that obviously you're not going to see any of this in the Torah, but is this them actually explaining what the Torah is, or do they say that this is actually the word of God? This is actually what God has told them. We believe in Allah, what Allah has told us in the Quran. We believe that, what Allah does, he sits on his throne he sits above his throne and stuff like that, so he's given us what he does. But here they're saying things about God. Is it that according to them this is what God has told them, or can you go deep into that a bit more?
So when it comes to the Talmud is made up of two different types of material. Number one, you have the stuff which speaks about the rabbinic law or the Jewish law, and all that is considered to be oral Torah, which God revealed. Essentially, it's revealed by God. The other part is Agada, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today is Agada. What is Agada? That's the non-halakhic part of the Talmud, or which means the part of the Talmud that doesn't talk about the commandments, right? So if you look at the Talmud, it seems that they're quoting the Agada material, the non-Jewish law material, just the same, and they're treating it just the same as the material which speaks about the Jewish law. If you look at the earliest, how earliest Jews viewed it, so the early Babylonian Jews saw that would not take the Agada indiscriminately, they would take it very seriously, it's very important to them. But it's not that every single thing they have to accept as authority, but a lot of it definitely they would accept, and it's just not something where it's 100% you have to accept something. Rather, you can be a little bit critical. And then you had the likes of Rashi and this and that. So their group said it's completely the same as the halakhic material, which means it's divinely inspired, divinely given, and everything.
Right. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in the Quran that they write the book with their own hands and they say it's from God, so Allah's referring mainly to this type of work, not the actual Torah itself then?
Well, in the context of Surah Al-Baqarah, I think Kitab there means Torah, because
Torah, okay. Because in here as well, you will see that you will see in here as well that they're writing with their own hands things that Allah has not told them about Himself.
Yeah, but you can definitely apply that ayah here, even because the meaning can encompass this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted to say you can apply it here as well, because they are writing things that Allah has not told them about Himself, and they're writing things and they're saying it is from Allah, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And when you look at the Talmud, what itself, it says it puts it at a higher position than the Torah itself. I have a video on this. I didn't put it in the presentation, but it mentions in the Talmud that study of the Talmud is more important than the study of the Bible. So it's not like we go here and we look at these things and they say that, they're completely useless. No, the Jews take this stuff very seriously. And many of the early ones like Rashi, right? And this group thought it was as binding and as authoritative and as God revealed as the other parts of the Talmud. And so definitely this is taken very seriously and accepted and taught and everything in Jewish tradition. So with that, the mention of, let me just go back to the narrations, that he wears phylacteries, which are the black cubes that Jews wear on their heads, right? Their foreheads. So God wears that. And now, so here's some other sources. If you want to read that, it's mentioned before where they're deriving all this from. And then it's mentioned that in the phylacteries that Jews wear, there are the praises of God in them. So they have verses that praise God in the Torah, and they're in their phylacteries. So they say the phylacteries that God wears, they have the praises of Israel in them.
You see, talking of phylacteries, if I could just pick up on something here, there is one Jewish scholar that mentions that Musa alayhi salam performed Hajj, and he said that Musa alayhi salam got his people to wear their phylacteries, and when they wore the phylacteries, they actually when Musa alayhi salam went to Pharaoh, he said, "Let my people go so they can do pilgrimage," and he said the wearing of the phylacteries had moved the people from the pyramid scheme to the cubic, not the cubic, sorry, the what do you call the phylacteries as a square? There's a word for it, but he actually mentions that Musa alayhi salam wore that to take his people to Hajj. So now they're saying that Allah wears it, that God wears the phylacteries as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it has the praises of Israel in that, right? So it's probably anyway. So Exodus 31:17. So this is in the Torah, what they would call the Torah. Mentions how God, in 6 days, he made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day, he stopped and took a long, deep breath. A lot of times it's translated as refreshed. Literally, it means that he took a long, deep breath. So you have this sort of stuff in their Bible as well. Okay, so this isn't reloading. So anyway, so what I quoted here.
So there's a lot of anthropomorphism in the Jewish concept of God himself.
Yeah. So sorry, so this thing isn't showing up, but essentially I was quoting Genesis 6, which is pretty famous, right? The part where it says that God regretted that he made humans.
Right.
So it's actually quoted here. So God regretted making humans on earth, and God's heart was sad in Genesis 6:6. If you go to the Genesis Rabbah, which is a midrash, which is sort of an explanation commentary on the verse, it mentions how God thought it was my mistake that I created humans below as a terrestrial being. Had I created them in the higher realm, meaning they, like angels, would not have rebelled against me. So the actual text for this is in the Hebrew, so I can't show you the primary text.
So this actually goes totally against what the Quran says. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the angels that he's creating man, and they question Allah, like, and Allah says, "I know what you don't know," kind of thing. Like, this kind of goes against it, because now it says that Allah regretted and he would have created them like angels, so that they would not have rebelled against me. But in the Quran, it kind of answers this. It gives you the answer to this now.
Yeah. But in Jewish tradition, it's completely the opposite. That's a good point. I never made the connection. Yeah. Anyway, so again, because it's not in Hebrew, you can see here, I asked a rabbi about it. He confirmed this is what the text says.
Right.
With that, let's move on to Barakah 3a. This mentions the night consists of 3 watches, and over each and every watch, the Holy One, blessed be he, sits and roars like a lion, and says, "Woe to me, that due to their sins I destroyed my house, burned my temple, and exiled them among the nations of the world." So God's saying, woe to be. In, I think this is pronounced Haggai 5b, it's mentioned how God cries. So he cries, for example, for the pride of the Jewish people. It's mentioned here, same reference, that God has his innermost chambers in which he cries. So he has like this little place, right, where he goes and he cries every now and then. So there are many reasons given for why he cries, such as he cried when the temple got destroyed. He cries that Jews who have the ability to learn Torah but don't learn it, he cries about that. So there are a few different reasons. In this midrash, right here at the top, you can see the reference. It mentions how God had a day. So the day the temple was destroyed, it was a day for God. It was a day of tumult and din and confusion, which basically tumult and din, all this, these are English words, basically just means he was very confused that day. So that ends essentially our discussion on the concept of God, but you can see it's very blasphemous. Now, many Jews are going to say, oh, this is metaphorical. So let's speak a little bit about that. So number one, I have this article right here that you can see, Anthropomorphism in Talmudic Literature, Trends in Jewish Thought and Scholarly Research. It mentions early church fathers would actually critique rabbis and Jews about things like this, because they saw that Jews literally believed this. So we have actually secondary sources which are showing us that the earliest Jews used to believe all this literally. If we go to this article right here, is the God of Judaism incarnate? We see the same thing, but with Zoroastrian critiques. So early Zoroastrian critiques of Judaism show that they knew that the rabbis in that era, the earliest rabbis, were taking all this literally. We have another article. It mentions how many rabbis, for example, there were many writings where they would actually be discussing the size of God, the size of his fingers, the size of this, the size of that, which shows they took it all literally. Actually, if you read the Talmud, like we just read the narrations, it's so obvious they're literal, right? And so not only that, but there were many Jews in places like France, province, in southern Germany, that there was no sort of this philosophical or a Christian influence to make them all take this metaphorically, and they continued to believe all this literally, right? So actually what happened, the reason a lot of Jews started looking at these things as metaphorical, and many classical rabbis, which knew all this was literal as well, the reason they started taking all this more metaphorically is because first of all, it's embarrassing, right? So they were embarrassed.
Yeah.
That's why so you have clear stuff like the mention that God rests and refreshes and regrets. That's clearly mentioned in their book, the Tanakh. But what are they going to do? Today they say, oh no, that means he stopped working. Oh no, it means he was sad. And because they're embarrassed.
That means that some of the well, not some, but most of the anthropomorphism that we find in Christianity, we can say that it was handed down from Judaism to them as well, because obviously they've taken quite a bit from Judaism. So like, when we're seeing the anthropomorphism here, that they had it, I mean, obviously the Jews cannot say that they were 100% monotheist if it's going to that level. Because, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran had mentioned that he had sent prophets after prophets after prophets to them. So it must have been that in different circumstances that they were falling in different forms of shirk. And now the Christians, after Isa alayhi salam came, the Jews were already in this anthropomorphism. And this is why Isa alayhi salam was sent to take them out of this. Yeah.
I guess it just depends on when these sort of traditions develop, right? Because we know they were, according to tradition, they were written down in the 2nd century, but their tradition says that Moses handed them down to them.
Yeah. So from the time of Moses all the way going down, it was an oral tradition, and they practiced it. They practiced a lot of things, but maybe it was not written down. So
the real question is, when did it actually begin? Like maybe some of these traditions do go back to Musa alayhi salam, possible. Some go back to prophets. In fact, some of them, like there's some things in the Talmud that the Quran confirms that are not in Tanakh. So definitely we would say some of them are, like, even many Christians have to agree to this, because there are things spoken about in the New Testament which assume what you find in the Talmud. Now, does that mean that somehow all the narrative of the oral Torah and God giving 2 Torahs is correct? No, all it means is that from our perspective, both Christians and Muslims, there are some things in the Talmud that are legit traditions passed down by prophets. Both Christians and Jews have to agree to this, or sorry, Muslims and Christians. But definitely that does not mean that we have to validate the idea that there were 2 Torahs and this and that. So it all just depends on when it began. If it could have began before Isa alayhi salam, it could have began after. We don't really know.
I would believe it was before Isa alayhi salam, because when you read the Bible itself, I mean, the amount of prophets that were sent pre-Isa alayhi salam, Allah would not have sent that many prophets if they were good and they were not doing any of this. So the fact that it was like, all this shirk was coming in from before, this is what prophets had to come, prophet after prophet, to kind of try and bring them back again. And I think what happened was Isa alayhi salam was the last straw that brought the camel's back, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Isa alayhi salam and specifically for them, and they still didn't want to listen. So obviously, like, we can see. But as far as I understand it, this comes from way back, because they were ruled by different nations. They were ruled by the Persians, and they took a lot of shirk from them. They were ruled them by the Romans. They took a lot of shirk from them. So anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Right. So definitely, I'd agree. Some of them probably at least some of it is going back, like the magic stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Anyway, so let's go to Maimonides, because it's very interesting that in his book, Rambam, in the Guide for the Perplexed, he admits that the reason he interprets the Midrash figuratively is because they're completely illogical. Therefore, he forces them to be figurative.
Right.
So,
That's interesting.
yeah, so this is the text for the guide for the perplexed, the yellow part. In the latter, we intended to examine all the passages in the Midrash which, if taken literally, appear to be inconsistent with truth and common sense, and must therefore be taken figuratively. So now you see when Jews say it's all figurative, are they looking at the text and they're saying, oh, thus it's figurative? Or are they going, this is complete nonsense,
Right.
but how can we just say it's complete nonsense? It must be figurative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
just to reconcile it, they say it
yeah.
must be figurative.
Yeah. So actually, remember, a lot of these, when they're saying it's nonsense,
Mm-hmm.
of course, just literally they mean that, but also because what they mean is because they're Ash'aris, essentially. They're extremely philosophical in their
Right.
beliefs about God. So Maimonides was a philosopher first and a Jew second, right? So he wants to get everything in line with his philosophy. So for example, he says that it's heretical to believe that God has a form. But if you read the Bible, it literally says God has a form. It says, God says something like to Moses, he says, or he says about Moses, I didn't let him see my form. So it literally says God has a form, but Maimonides says it's heretical to believe he has a form. Why? Because he was a philosopher first. He got his ideas from philosophy. Then he tried to reconcile the Talmud and the Midrashim with those things.
Interesting, because we blame Paul for bringing in Greek philosophy in Christianity, when now you're mentioning to us that Maimonides himself was a philosopher first. So he too introduced philosophy into Judaism. Then
the rabbis before Maimonides did not believe the Agada, which again is the non Jewish law part of the Talmud. They did not believe it was metaphorical. They believed it was literal, like Rashi. And the early Babylonian rabbis, they believed all this was literal. It was Maimonides that said, no, it's figurative. Right. And it's interesting because some Jews will try and chuck away all the literature that is in the Agada. The problem is that the sages believe these things. So if you're trying to chuck all this literature away, what that means is your sages were a bunch of fools. And the reason I use fools is because Maimonides uses the language of fools in the guide for the perplexed. So he says the people who just throw all this literature away and they say it's all wrong are a bunch of fools, and the people who take it all literally have to believe in foolish stuff as well. So great. Here's the problem: how do we know what the vowels for the Bible are? We get them from Jewish tradition. We get them from these sages. Right. So if you say, and according to them, they get the oral Torah from these sages. So if you say that all the stuff that they're believing is a bunch of idiocy and we have to throw it all away, that means your sages were a bunch of idiots.
He actually says that it is foolishness, and and what about the other rabbis? Do they agree with him on that, or what's the?
Well, a lot of rabbis, so Maimonides became very popular, right?
Maimonides is one of their top rabbis, Rambam.
In his time, he was actually seen to be blasphemous. His books were burned for being blasphemous and this and that. But later on, he became a lot more popular. So you'd find many rabbis today agreeing with him. But they've taken it to an extreme. So for example, many rabbis who ask them today, they'll say, for example, God doesn't get angry. Mm-hmm. But when the Bible says he gets angry, and they say this is just the Bible is just using human language. So I think Ramban said this. He's not Rambam. He's another one, Ramban. He said that the Bible just uses human language to express stuff. So a lot of rabbis today say, it says in the Bible God gets angry, he gets this, he does, but all
that's interesting there, because Christianity claims that the God of Judaism was an angry God, and they had to change the concept of God to God of love. So that's something interesting. So that means that concept of God being angry, actually they must have picked that up from Judaism itself.
Yeah, so you can definitely see how they're not trying to look at these texts and try to understand what the texts themselves are saying. First, they're coming with their philosophical beliefs. Then they're reading them into just like the Christian authors do. They believe that this is about Jesus. For example, Isaiah 7 is about Jesus. Then they force it to be about Jesus, right? So you already decide something is about this one thing, and then you try and get it out. And it's interesting because Jews hate Christians for that, right? They always say, "What are you doing? You're doing." Right. I forgot the terms, but you're reading into the text. Well, they themselves read into the text.
Tell me something. Are the normal lay Jews aware of this, or this is mainly rabbinical, where it's mainly the rabbis who are aware of the way they talk of God, or is it something that, or is it something that is like, every Jew knows that according to the Talmud, God is like this, and God is created as this, and then God is mentioned as this and the other, like, because it seems something like strange, because like you said, they accuse Christianity of something, and then you can see just as much in their teaching.
I would say a bunch of probably religious Jews are more familiar with it. Probably not to the extent that we do find it,
right?
But they are more familiar. It's like when it comes to the Talmud, it's not like they're completely ignorant of what it says. In fact, they have like these classes where you finish the Talmud.
Yeah.
You do like 30 minutes a day. One page takes 30 minutes.
So it is something. It is something that is known among the lay Jews, and because one thing I understand as well is in Judaism.
But I think more with the religious Jews, they would have some idea.
But in Judaism, I tend to find that in Judaism, people are more religious than what you'll find in Christianity. Yeah, you have people who know their Bible. They will read their Torah. They will read their Talmud and stuff like that. But in Christianity, most of the people that I know haven't even read the Bible. They will come with arguments stuff like they themselves don't know. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
Right. Okay. So with that, let's just transition into the next topic of rabbi worship, which Allah alludes to in the Quran, or not alludes to. He literally says it, right? Yes. He says about the Jews and Christians, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. They've taken their scholars and monks as lords besides Allah. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he explained what this means is in legislation. So if Allah made something halal and the rabbis made it haram, they would follow the rabbis and vice versa. So it's in legislation. So we know that Tawheed in the Islamic concept is broken down into three. You can break it down into 2, 3, or 4. They were explained different ways, but let's go with the breaking it down into 4, because that's easy for us now. The first part would be singling God out in terms of his lordship, such as the fact that he's the creator, sustainer, everything. Second thing would be in terms of his names and attributes, that there are certain names and attributes.
Asma wa sifat.
Yeah. So there are attributes of God that are only his, and there's certain names of God that you cannot give to anything after him. Like, for example, the name Allah or Ar-Rahman, you cannot name anyone by those names. There's some names, like, for example, Malik, the king, that you can ascribe to someone else. But even then, it's not in the same sense, right? So, for example, if we say Dawood alayhi salam was a king, we would not mean it in the same sense that we mean Allah is the king, right?
Right.
So that's the second sort of tawheed. The third part is worship. So there's no one who deserves worship but him. And then a fourth category, and sometimes this is mixed in with the first category, which is lordship. But because we're going to be dealing with this exclusively, that's why I decided to bring it down.
You're talking of tawheed rububiyyah, tawheed of asma wa sifat, and tawheed of uluhiyyah, yeah?
Yeah, and then there's some categorized it into 4. And so the fourth would be in terms of legislation, that no one has the right to legislate except Allah. So see, sometimes people would put that in as part of rububiyyah, right? But it was divided different ways. But the reason I'm dividing it into 4 right now is because mostly we're going to see with the legislation, this rabbi worship.
Right.
So in Islam, you're supposed to single God out. He's the only one who has the right to legislate. Allah says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever doesn't judge by what Allah has sent down, they are the disbelievers. So there are many ways to which we can see rabbi worship. One of them, the clearest one, Baba Metzia 59b, it's mentioned the story that a bunch of rabbis basically agreed that a certain commandment means X. Then there was this one rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, who said it means Y. And he was right. Rabbi Eliezer was right, but he was the minority. Right. So then he does a bunch of miracles to prove he's right. And then God himself speaks and he says, a divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halakha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion? So he was right. Rabbi Eliezer was right, and God himself spoke. So
they claim that God spoke and told them about this?
Yeah, so this would be, today it would be more interpreted as a parable. So they're trying to get a point across by mentioning the story.
Right, okay.
But the point is, but we're looking at the lesson of the story. And so what happens then in the story is that the rabbis say, it is written, it is not in heaven, which is essentially to say it's not your Torah to decide. It's we, the rabbis, decide what the Jewish law says. Whatever you say is irrelevant. Since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice. We don't care what you say, God. Even if you speak to us and tell us something, we don't care because you gave it to us. You gave it to us at Mount Sinai, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah after a majority to incline. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halakha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. So even though God said this is the correct interpretation, they said, no, we don't care what you say. We're going to follow the majority of rabbis. Then, so they mention what was God doing? They asked the prophet Elijah, what was God doing during all this time? And God says, the prophet Elijah says to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. My children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. So, by the way, let me just point out Exodus 23:2, which they're quoting after majority to incline. They're trying to use this as evidence to say that the Torah says if the majority of rabbis agree with something, you have to follow them. It actually says the opposite. It says don't follow the majority. It says don't follow the majority when they're wrong. And so this is interesting because Allah mentions in the Quran, they change the word from the right place. All of the Talmud, it's taking everything out of context. And this is an example of that. So by twisting what Exodus 23 says, they get this idea that even if God were to, the lesson of the story is, even if God says something, but the majority of rabbis disagree with them, you follow the rabbis, not God. So that's the first one I'll mention. Here's another one I'll mention. This is in a midrash, which midrash are less authoritative than the Talmud, but it's still serious. It's important, right? So this mentions how Moses actually ascends to God, and he hears God sitting and studying Red Heifer. So this is a book written by a rabbi called Rabbi Eliezer. It's the same rabbi. And he was studying this book, and he was uttering halakha in the name of the one who spoke it. Quote, so this is what God says, Rabbi Eliezer said, a calf is 1 year old and a cow is 2 years old. Moses said before him, Master of all the worlds, may it be your will that he, so basically asked that Rabbi Eliezer be from his descendants. But the point is, God is studying this rabbi's work, and then he's citing halakha in his name. What that means is, he's quoting the rabbi to prove that he correctly understands the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are you still there? Because you're.
Hey, I'm here. I'm just
okay. In another place, in another midrash, I believe, it's also mentioned that Moses says, "Sovereign of the universe, thou dost hold in thy power the creatures of heaven and earth. Yet thou sit and cite halakha in the name of a human being." So this is in Judaism Discovered. Michael Hoffman quoted this. This is, you can see the reference here. And I asked a rabbi about this. So I asked a rabbi, is this actually in the thing? Because it's in Hebrew. And he confirmed for me that this is actually what it says. He says, yes, it is there, but it's not in English. And you can see the text is actually quoted in this commentary, Jewish commentary right here. Where when Moses heard this, he said, how is it possible that you, O God, who owns heaven and earth, are sitting expounding your Torah and quoting a human being as proof that Torah has been interpreted correctly? God answered that he would be from the descendants of Moses. So the point is, why is God studying the writings of rabbis and citing them as proof he understands the Torah correctly? And so another thing here we find that it says in Menachah 29b in the Talmud that a certain rabbi named Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, he understood Torah better than Moses himself. So I'm not going to read out the story, but the point of the story is that he understood Torah better than Moses. And Moses, he actually attended a class with this rabbi, and he had no idea what was going on. So Moses went and sat at the end of the 8th row in Rabbi Akiva's study hall and did not understand what they were saying.
Moses, the prophet Moses?
Yeah, Musa alayhi salam.
He went and then sat in a class with the rabbi?
Yeah, so it might be interpreted as parable, like this is the lesson they're trying to teach.
Right.
But this is the point they're trying to get across. This rabbi was so advanced in his Torah study, he knew it better than Moses himself. And then Moses, he says to God, you have a man as great as this, and still you chose to give the Torah to me? Why? God said to him, be silent.
Can this not be considered as qidr then? That
what?
Rabbi Akiva or whatever. Qidr.
No, because he's a guy, and I'm gonna bring this up right now. Right. He's actually a guy in the Talmud who speaks about stuff. he's a rabbi they're quoting in the Talmud a bunch as well.
Okay. So they're not conflating Khidr with this rabbi then, because Khidr was the one who came to teach Moses, so Musa alayhi salam.
Anyway, so this is so foolish, that this idea that Rabbi Akiva knows Torah better than Moses, because this is a guy who actually used to spy on his rabbi when he went to the bathroom. So I've put the text on the screen, Baruch 62a, Rabbi
I think I've seen this in one of your videos you advertised.
So he once entered the bathroom after his teacher, and he learned that you should not defecate while facing east and west, that you should not uncover himself while standing, but while sitting, and that you should not wipe with the right hand. And then a guy asked him, what? You were so rude to your teacher that to that extent that you observed that much? And he replied, it is Torah and I must learn. This is the guy who knows Torah better than Musa alayhi salam, according to them.
Right.
And then, so another rabbi does the same thing. And then this rabbi also spies on his rabbi while he's being intimate with his wife.
Yeah, I think I read that as well, that you put on YouTube.
And the rabbis, instead of condemning this, they just started discussing the stuff that these guys learned. And they're like, okay, so why one must not wipe with his right hand, but with his left? So it's strange. Another example of rabbi worship is Bava Bekra 12a, where it mentions, from the day that the temple was destroyed, prophecy was taken from the prophets and given to the sages. So the sages who are writing the Talmud and quoting in it, they're actually divinely inspired.
Do you think this is the reason why Christians shun the Talmud? They don't want to believe it because of the things that are in there?
Yeah, I mean, number one, it's not part of their tradition, right?
Right.
Number two, also, when a Christian hears of the Talmud, one of the first things he's going to be told is that it says that Isa alayhi salam is burning in feces.
In
hell.
I've read all that about Isa alayhi salam. Yeah.
Is the Talmud speaking about that? I think it is. But there are some problems in that the rabbis get the dates wrong and this and that.
Right.
That could just be a mistake on the part of the rabbis. But if you hear something like that, you're going to have a aversion to it, right? So I would say that's they make a huge deal out of that. So that would probably be the main reason. I don't think they believe in the Talmud, apart from the fact that it's not really a part of their tradition, right?
Right.
And so also in Bava Betra 12a, it mentions that a sage is greater than a prophet.
Subhanallah.
Right. So in Erevin 21b, it mentions, my son, be careful to fulfill the words of the sages even more than the words of the Torah. For the words of the Torah, basically the words of the Torah, most of them are not, if you transgress them, you don't get a death penalty. Whereas with respect to the words of the sages, anyone who transgresses the words of the sages is liable to receive the death penalty. This is interesting because if you talk about the fact that the rabbis introduced new laws in the Talmud, Jews are going to say, no, they didn't introduce new laws. Rather, this was just a hedge around the fence, which means they made up new laws so that you wouldn't transgress the Torah laws. So, for example, I'll just give you an example off the top of my. This isn't a law, but I'm just thinking about like what an example of something like this would be. So, for example, they say if you're not allowed to eat pork, then don't even look at it or don't even go near it or something. That would be like an example of a rabbinic command. This is not an actual one, but I'm giving you an example of a tape, so sort of what these types of what they say is. But the problem is, why are they then punishable by death? Doesn't make sense. So it actually is a new law that you're adding in, and the idea that these were just extra laws given as a hedge around the fence is fake, because why are they getting killed? So here in Gittin 57a, which is the passage which speaks about Isa alayhi salam, Jesus boiling in excrement, it mentions anyone who mocks the words of the sages will be sentenced to boiling excrement. So I guess both of us are going to burn in hell with boiling excrement.
Right. So that means they're implying that Jesus alayhi salam actually went against the words of the sages, and that's why he's boiling in excrement, because that's what they say about Isa alayhi salam.
Because in Matthew he does mock them, right? And even in John he calls them sons of devils. And
exactly. The words that he says to them, children of adulteresses and stuff like that, like killers of prophets and stuff like that, So they've taken that to mean that, so Isa alayhi salam himself is boiling in excrement. Interesting.
Yeah. So now the next one is in Sanhedrin. So it's a little bit longer. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but essentially one of the things they mention is there's this thing called epikoros, and basically this is mentioned in the Mishnah, and what it means is this is someone who is going to have no share in the world to come, and there are many different opinions about who this epikoros is, And one of them, or a lot of them, are basically people who disrespect the rabbi. So one of the opinions, one who treats another with contempt before a rabbinic scholar or a Torah scholar, one who treats a Torah scholar himself with contempt, someone who says, how have the sages benefited us in any way? Someone who says that, let's see, right, so how have they benefited us? Someone who says, let's see, he doesn't call his teacher rabbi, so he forgets to say rabbi, he doesn't give that respect to him, he doesn't use that title. Someone who he says like those sages in a contemptuous overtone, so like saying, oh yeah, those sages, something like that. So these people will have no share in the world to come if they are in fact epikuros. So with that, we'll move on to the next topic, which is killing prophets, right? So we know this, it's pretty famous that they kill prophets. Allah mentions it in the Quran. إن الذين يكفرون بآيات الله ويقتلون النبيين بغير الحق or بغير حق. I think it's بغير حق. I might have misquoted that, but anyway, point is we know that they tried to kill Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They tried to kill Isa alayhi salam. They killed Yahya alayhi salam. They killed Zakaria alayhi salam.
Concerning Zakaria, well, I asked one rabbi about that, and he said that there were many Zacarias, and the Zakaria that is mentioned in the book is not the same Zakaria that was the prophet or whatever. They try to wiggle their way out of that, to wiggle the way out of being called them killers of prophets, because they say that in antiquity there were people with the same names, and it was Zakaria bin whatever, not the Zakaria who was the prophet.
Regardless, the Tanakh itself mentions that they killed prophets.
That mentioned. But when it comes to Zakaria, I'd asked about Zakaria himself, and one rabbi mentioned that it wasn't the same Zakaria that is mentioned. So he was not according to them, he was not a prophet, the one that was killed.
Right. So one of the prophets they killed was a prophet Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And in the Talmud, it actually says he deserved to be killed. So here's the story. Like, there's a little bit more up to the story that I didn't put here. But anyway, the point is one of these people kills Isaiah. And then it says, when the saw reached to where his mouth was, Isaiah died. He died specifically as this point due to what he said, in the midst of a people of unclean lips I dwell. So because he criticized the Jewish people, he was killed. He was punished for referring to the Jewish people in a derogatory manner. This is a punishment from God.
When I asked Rabbi about this, he said, "Oh, it wasn't the Jews who killed him, but Manasseh. Manasseh was supposed not to be a Jew or something. I don't know. I mean, maybe you know that better than me, but like I said, they try to wiggle their way out of this when you tell them that they were killers of prophets, because the Quran mentions there were the Quran mentions they were killers of prophets. So to disown the Quran and to disown what Jesus said that they were killers of prophets. So the actual rabbi who I asked is from, he said no, Manasseh was not a Jew, so it wasn't the Jew who were killing prophets. It wasn't the Jew who actually killed Isaiah, according to them.
So first, we know that they did kill prophets according to the Tanakh. But now we see here that they're justifying it. So they're saying he deserved to die, and it was actually a punishment from God. So
whether it was a Jew who killed him or not, they are saying that he deserved to die.
Yeah, it was a punishment from God.
Right.
And so I think Rashi says the reason this happened is because because a lot of people criticize the Jews in the Tanakh. So why is it saying that because he criticized them, therefore God punished him by killing him? Right. And so Rashi and some of the Jews offer a couple of explanations. Number one, the idea that there was no benefit in saying this, or number two, the idea that he said it, but God never inspired it, so he just said it without right. But the point is, because he criticized the Jews, God decided to kill him. Gabriel, so we know the Quran mentions how the Jews in Medina saw Jibril alayhi salam, Gabriel, peace be upon him, the angel, as the enemy of the Jews, right?
Mm-hmm, yes.
Say whoever is an enemy to Jibril or Gabriel, then indeed he has brought it down upon your heart with the permission of Allah, which means the Quran. He's brought the Quran down to the heart of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Sure. Right? And so there's this mention in the Quran. And we see that they actually have a lot of negative stuff that they say about Jibreel alayhi salam in the Talmud, almost taking him as an enemy. The first thing we'll actually start by ironically speaking about how they deify him. So in Sanhedrin 44b, it's mentioned, basically God speaks about Abraham and Sarah in a derogatory way behind their back. And then Jibreel says to Allah, Master of the universe, were the patriarch Abraham and the matriarch Sarah to come now and stand before you, would you speak to them in such a manner and put them to shame? Is it not stated, debate your cause with your neighbor and do not reveal the secret of another? Basically, Jibreel is saying to Allah, how come you're backbiting them? And then they say here, the Gemara asks, but does the angel Gabriel have so much authority that he can reprove God, which means rebuke God, in such a manner? The Gemara answers yes. And then they say that one of the names of Gabriel is Piskon, because he splits words and argues with God on high. So he constantly does this. He constantly argues with God. And of course, if you're going to say something like that about Jibreel alayhi salam, then you are sort of taking him as your enemy, right? Because you're ascribing such blasphemy to him and blasphemy to Allah.
But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us understand that the angels did not have a mind of their own. They do not have free will so that they can discuss anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what mission he gave them to do, they go and they do it and come back, isn't it? They're not going to be standing there and arguing with Allah.
Yeah, and if you think about when the angels in the Quran speak about why is Allah creating human beings, they do it in a respectful way, right?
Exactly, not arguing with him.
Yeah, but they don't do it like that, where they're rebuking God and saying, well, essentially, if Gabriel is right here, that God did backbite them and this and that, and he wins the argument, right, which is what happens, then what God made a mistake. So he's not perfect anymore, right? There's also that problem. Okay, so in terms of...
interesting stuff, brother.
In Yoma 77a, it's also, there's this whole story about how actually Michael is first presented, the angel Mikael, alayhi salam, and he's presented in a good way. He's the ministering angel of the Jewish people. Then they start speaking about Jibreel alayhi salam in a very derogatory way. They say he disobeyed God and he was punished by fire and this and that. So it's a very long narration, so I'm not going to read it out. But anyway, he's punished by fire and the angels do this to him.
Jibreel alayhi salam is punished by fire, according to them.
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up especially is because so it's a derogatory way to speak about Jibreel alayhi salam, but also if you look at how everything they quote, it's taken out of context, which proves it's a made-up story.
Right. And so like you mentioned the verse of the Quran earlier on, so that means the verse of the Quran implies to that directly. Then the fact that they actually ascribe things to Jibreel alayhi salam which is not true, and they hate him basically.
Yeah. So actually, the way they literally they take one chapter, which is before, and try and say it comes after another chapter to come up with this story, and it's all just taken completely out of context. It would take too long for me to explain how it's taken out of context here, because it's a very long story. So I have a video on this, right? You can just see it. It's like Talmud says that Angel Gabriel was punished by fire, where I go and show how everything is taken completely out of context. But the point is, it's taken out of context, and then it ends up like speaking about Jibreel alayhi salam in such a manner that he's punished by fire and this and that. We also have praying to the dead. So Sota 34b, and so I forgot to put it, but I think Numbers 14:34 mentions that the person here we're going to speak about, Caleb, is righteous and he followed God wholeheartedly. And here it mentions, so this teaches that Caleb separated himself from the council of the other spies and went and prostrated himself on the graves of the forefathers in Hebron. He said to them, my forefathers, pray for mercy for me so that I will be saved from the council of the spies. Praying to the dead is shirk in Islam. Even they will say, oh no, he's not praying to the dead. He's asking the dead to pray to God on his behalf. We consider that shirk, right? So that's another shirk in Judaism. I have here, so remember we before spoke about how the Tawheed of Allah is divided into different ways. And one of the ways is his names, right? That you cannot name anyone with his names. Some names like Malik, like king, yeah, but even then it wouldn't be in the same sense. But like, for example, Allah, the name Allah, or Ar-Rahman, and these types of things, we cannot ascribe them to someone else. And so you have this as well in the Talmud. There's this angel Metatron, whose name is the tetragrammaton. So we cannot say that because, of course, they don't say it in Judaism. So out of respect, we're not going to say that.
The angel Metatron, wasn't that Idris alayhi salam, that Enoch, that they thought was Metatron or something?
I think there's something like there's identification between Metatron and Enoch.
I've read about this. They believe that Idris alayhi salam was the Metatron.
Yeah, I've heard it, but I haven't looked too much into it. But yeah, I've heard that too. And so in Sanhedrin 38b, it mentions this term, the Lord, and what they mean by that is, the name of God in Judaism, which they're not allowed to say, the tetragrammaton, is referring to the angel Metatron, whose name is like the name of his master. So he has the same name as God. And this is the name that you can't even say. It's according to them, it's the ineffable name of God, the most important name. And yet they're saying an angel is named with that name. So that would be a shirk as well. Let's talk about Trinity in the Zohar. So
interesting. This is going to be interesting, this one, because Trinity, of course, we always think that the Trinity is Christian, even it's not Christian, but where they got it from. So it's going to be interesting, brother.
Right. So the Zohar is, just for anyone who doesn't know, it's their third holy book. We can say it like that. So they also believe, the majority of Jews believe in this, like 99%. And what they say is that it's also part of the oral Torah. So sort of the mystical secrets were revealed to Musa alayhi salam at Sinai. And that's what they believe is recorded in the Zohar. So we're looking at the Pritzker edition, volume 12, after an hour or whatever. Sorry, so we're looking at the Pritzker edition, volume 12, page 187 in the PDF. So I'll just read it out, and you'll see it's a very Trinity passage. And just so everyone knows, this is not supposed to be Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but you can clearly see the Christian influence. The daily unification is a unification to be fathomed, to deploy one's will. We have discussed this unification in numerous places. The daily unification is a unification of the verse, first, the Lord our God, the Lord, Deuteronomy 6:4. They are all one. Hence, he is designated one. But look, there are three names. How are they one? Even though we proclaim one, why are they one? Well, through the vision of the Holy Spirit, it becomes known in the vision of the eye to comprehend that these three are one, etc., etc.
So that means that concept must have been taken from Judaism then. Well, the concept of three being one, and I would have thought that it was a Trinity in a different sense altogether. They had a different type of Trinity on the Jews, but now it seems it's the same thing because Yahweh and the Spirit, except that Jesus is not mentioned in You see,
right,
the Christians have actually put Jesus in there to make it the three, but it seems that it's the same type of Trinity.
Jews believe that the Zohar is these mystical secrets were revealed to Moses, and then it was written early on, and this and that. Mm-hmm. But from an actual academic historical standpoint, the Zohar is written in the 13th century, so the Zohar author is getting it from Christians. But if you were to follow their tradition, then it does.
No, the oral tradition was there. The oral tradition was there.
But this part wasn't, and it seems that they've made it up later on. But
right.
Yeah. Anyway, also the Son of God concept is alluded to as well. So, in the Zohar Part 3, page 307, the Amsterdam edition mentions, "You are the good shepherd. Of you it is said, kiss the Son. You are great here below, the teacher of Israel, the Lord of the serving angels, the Son of the Most High, the Son of the Holy One. May his name be praised and his Holy Spirit." Interesting, because it says kiss the Son. And this is something that Jews and Christians argue about. And Jews say that it doesn't actually say kiss the Son, that the Hebrew doesn't say that, but the Christians say, no, you're supposed to take it in the Aramaic or whatever. But here in the Zohar, kiss the Son is mentioned. And also you can see, I asked the Zohar scholar Daniel C. Matt about what the reference for this is. He also confirms it's in 3307a in many editions, and here you can also see it's in the Amsterdam edition. So
this is very surprising, actually, because like I'm saying, I'm thinking in my mind that this issue of the Son being literal was supposed to be a Christian stuff, but now we're actually seeing it in Jewish literature as well. And it's like they're basically the same thing. Then there's no difference between that belief. So the Jews cannot say that they were 100% monotheistic if they start creeping in, even if they've taken it afterwards in the 13th century or whatever and added it into their books. I mean, they cannot say that they're monotheistic. I'm beginning to look at Judaism now as very, very less monotheistic than what they claim to be.
And even we know that there were some who said Ezra is the son of God. In the Quran, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ أُزَيْرٌ ابْنُ اللَّهِ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ اللَّهِ. The Jews say Uzair is the son of God, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah, or the son of Allah, God, same thing, right? So there's actually a manuscript, I think it's 4 Ezra, 2nd Ezra or something, but I remember the exact reference, but there is a manuscript which mentions that in the Syriac manuscripts of this apocryphal writing about Ezra, there is deification of Ezra at the end. So Ezra becomes a god.
Right.
So because sometimes people say, oh no, this is just in the Quran, but is there any other source? There actually is.
There are other sources. I've actually written a blog post about this, and there is also a mention in the Hasidic Jews. They have a song that they said that they sing, and they're asking God. Actually, when we look for Ezra, we look for it. We search for it under Ezra as the son of God, but they actually called him Uzair. And the song that they're singing is Uzair, Uzair, the son of God, bring him fast so that hasten his coming so that the Messiah can come. I actually have reference to this in my blog. Actually, it is a song that they sing, calling him the son of God. So for those who deny that any of this is like what the Quran says is false, they probably don't know this song this hymn that the actual Hasidic Jews have. It's written clearly in my. I've added it in my what's name. But unfortunately, what happened? It was in Sefaria. They actually mentioned it in Sefaria. Then when I went into Sefaria.org to look for it, they actually removed it because must have been causing some controversies for them. But it actually mentions clearly that, and also it mentions because the fact that Uzair Ezra had written the Bible or the Torah almost by heart. Because of the fact that he was given that responsibility, many of the Jews thought that he must be the son of God to be able to write the Bible by heart. You see, I done some research on that, and that was what I came up with.
Even Elijah is deified in some sense in the rabbinic and the Kabbalah writing. So the sort of idea that you can take a man and sort of elevate him is also done with Elijah. So Elijah is almost turned into a superhero in some of the Kabbalah, to where he comes and he helps Jews and this and that.
And like I mentioned earlier on, Enoch as well, Metatron, the article that I read about in the book. There's a book about it as well, where he's considered as the Metatron and next to God.
Elijah's stuff would actually be canon, right? So it would actually be in the Kabbalah. And Metatron, we mentioned about Metatron having been named with the Tetragrammaton, so that's canon Talmud as well.
Exactly.
Anyway, so let's go to magic. So Allah mentions this about the Jews in the Quran as well. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانَ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا يُعَلِّمُونَ النَّاسَ السِّحْرَ. And they followed the what the devils recited during the reign of Solomon, and Solomon did not disbelieve, but the devils disbelieved. They taught the people magic, and you find a lot of magic in the Talmud. Actually, I didn't put
the actual Kabbalah itself, I think, is based on magic.
Yeah, so the practical Kabbalah is, in its essence, magic. Yeah, right. Definitely. But in the Talmud, so Sanhedrin 17a, there's the mention that if you want to have a place in the great Sanhedrin court, you must be extremely learned about sorcery. You must be what they say here is you must be a master of sorcery. And so elsewhere it's mentioned. We'll get to it. But here's another mention that in Sanhedrin 65b, Rav Hanina and another Rav would sit every Shabbat Eve and engage in the study of Sefer Yetzirah, and a third born calf would be created for them, and they would eat it in honor of Shabbat. In Shabbat 34a, there's a mention of how a rabbi, when I think he's disrespected, and then at the end here you can see he directed his eyes towards him and turned him into a pile of bones. He killed him, I guess, with like some sort of laser vision or something. Sanhedrin 68a. So there's this mention that Rabbi Eliezer, remember this is the rabbi that God studies his works, he actually knew a lot of halakot of how to plant cucumbers, but no one essentially ever taught him that. And this is making, so as you can see here, with regard to the planting of cucumbers by sorcery. So he used to make cucumbers by doing magic. And then at one point, once he and I were walking along the way, and he said to me, "My teacher, teach me about the planting of cucumbers." I said one statement of sorcery, and the entire field became filled with cucumbers, right? And so then the rabbis say, well, how is it that Rabbi Eliezer is performing sorcery? Because isn't this disallowed in the Torah? And essentially they say, the response is, performing sorcery not in order to use it, but in order to teach oneself the commandments that are derived from it. Or teach oneself the halakha, so the teach him about the commandment itself. So you're essentially, in another place it's mentioned that, I think Rashi says this actually, that you're allowed to do magic if you're like trying to catch a criminal, right? And here you can see some of the justification was if you want to be a judge on the court and this and that. So essentially learn magic, and even here he's doing magic, right? So not only does he know it, he's doing it, and they're saying, yeah, it's fine, he didn't break any commandment by doing this, which shows you what? That you're allowed to learn magic in these extents. And of course magic is shirk, it's calling upon the devils. So imagine someone's like, yeah, to learn about the nature of shirk, go do some shirk. Right? Yeah, so it's problematic. Superstition. So there are a bunch of examples of this. I'll mention Shabbat 156a,
Can I just stop you here for a minute, just to mention one thing. For people who want to learn more about because the brother obviously he's condensing a lot of this work. If you go to his website, Proving Islam, and give it a like and then subscribe as well, because I'm sure the brother's got more things coming. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well, the People of the Book, because we have we have many more things coming. So don't forget Proving Islam. You go there and you subscribe and like his this brother's work, because he's got some very good things that he's but obviously on this program here he's having to condense a lot of this, and you will see much more on his channel there. So carry on, brother. Sorry.
Right. So we have a hadith which mentions that some people today woke up as believers in me. Mm-hmm. So Allah is speaking. So I'm paraphrasing the hadith, by the way. So this is not the exact wording. And then Allah says, some people woke up as believers in the stars. And also we have in the Quran, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا نَصِيبًا مِنَ الْكِتَابِ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْجِبْتِ وَالطَّاغُوتِ. Haven't you seen those who were given a portion of the scripture? They believe in superstition and false gods. So Allah mentioned in the Quran, Jews believe in superstition. And one of the superstitions, the main, or not the main, but one of them is this sort of believing in the stars, constellations and this and that. So here, Shabbat 156a in the Talmud, it mentions, for example, one who is born under the influence of the sun will be a radiant person. One who is born under the influence of Venus will be rich. One who is born under the influence of Mercury will be an enlightened and expert man. One who is born under the influence of the moon will be a man who suffers pains, etc., etc. So the point is this sort of superstition, and this would be considered shirk in Islam. With that, let's go on to idols, because they actually made idols. So Yoma 54a. So when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, the priest would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs who were clinging to one another and say to them, "See how you are beloved before God like the love of a male and a female." The two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. So if you actually Google what these cherubs look like, so they were like children, like with female sort of children. Sorry, like angel. They had like these angelic wings and that. And one of
wings and like like children in wings or whatever.
Like Cupid. extension.
Yeah, Cupid.
And one of them is supposed to symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the other one, the Jewish people. And here,
Right.
it's mentioned that they were clinging to one another. Actually, this is actually a sexual cling, because if we continue on the narration, it mentions it means like a man joined and clinging to his partner, his wife. In other words, the cherubs appear to be embracing one another. So this is what they say in the non-bold part, which means it's not actually in the text, but it's what they're explaining. When Gentiles destroyed the second temple and entered the sanctuary, they saw these drawings of the cherubs clinging to one another. They peeled them from the wall, took them out to the market, and said, "These Jews, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, should they be occupied with such matters, making images of this kind?" They immediately debased and destroyed them, as it is stated, "All who honor her debase her because they have seen her nakedness." So when the Romans are
they have these images in the temple.
Yeah, of these cherubs.
Of these cherubs. So I mean, the Bible is saying to them that you should not be making any graven images, and then they have these images in the temple.
Cherubs are allowed in the Bible. And it's explicitly stated make them. And actually, I didn't put this here, but they actually pray towards the Ark of the Covenant, and on the Ark of the Covenant, you had these cherubs. So they would actually make these cherubs, these graven images. One of them, which is supposed to represent God in the sexual image, and you're supposed to pray towards it. That was their direction of prayer, according to them. So we know in Islam they were supposed to pray towards Masjid al-Aqsa,
right.
But here they're praying actually towards the cherubs. So how can you be more idolatrous than that, right?
I mean, it's getting worse than what I thought. I mean, the actual shirk is getting worse than what I had known, because I'd never known this thing about them turning towards the cherubs and praying. But like, you know, as I'm listening to you, alhamdulillah, mashallah, you bring a lot of good information, and I hope this benefits a lot of the viewers who'd be watching this. But like, you know, I knew that there was certain, you know, there was a certain amount of polytheism, but you know, the cherubs and all that, like, you know, this something new to me. So I'm learning something new myself here. So anyway.
Right, so some people would say, well, there's disagreement about whether it's sexual or not, but the Zohar confirms it's sexual, as Daniel Simat, who's a Zohar scholar, says the Talmudic passage does imply a sexual embrace. The Zohar sometimes implies this as well. So the Zohar confirms it's sexual in some places.
So what is, I mean, the influence of the Zohar in Judaism? How influential, how important is the Zohar then? Like, you know, if you mention it to a Jew, he might turn on, because I understand that there are some of the Jews that do not accept the Talmud and the Zohar. I think I can't remember the names of that sect, but they only believe in the Torah itself.
There's a problem with that, in that you don't know what the vowel pointings are really, right? So it's hard to sort of reject the Talmudic sages, because then not only do you not know the vowel pointings, but you don't know who authored what book. Like, for example, it doesn't say Moses authored the first 5 books.
Right.
Where do they get that from? They get it from the
rabbis. Oral tradition.
Yeah. So you can reject it if you want, but the problem is, you got anonymous books then. Some of the books, there are authors. For example, some of the Psalms, there's a way to read the Psalms and say David wrote this. There are some ways to read the Psalms and say Solomon wrote that. There's another way to read that in Hebrew to mean that this is dedicated for Solomon. But yeah, so there's some books you can find authorship for, but majority of them, in fact, we know because of biblical scholarship today that even the books that they claim were written by this prophet have stuff in them that they could not have written. Right. So then you essentially have a book which is written by an anonymous author. It becomes very problematic.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, the Zohar is considered to be oral Torah. Mm-hmm. So it's very important, right? Yeah. So let's go on to racism. Zohar 147a mentions the soul of the living being, namely Israel, or let's go here, the soul of the other nations, meaning, or actually, never mind, I'm just going to read it all out. The soul of the living beings, namely Israel, for they are signs of the blessed Holy One, and their holy souls derive from him. So their souls actually come directly from God. The souls of the other nations, the Gentiles, whence does it come? Rabbi Elazar said, from those impure aspects of the left, defiling them and anyone approaching them. So these are actually the demonic powers. As you can see in the footnote, Daniel C. Matt explains from those impure aspects at the left, from demonic powers stemming from the left side of the Sphirot. So if you actually read the Zohar, it's obvious what aspects of the left means, but because people will probably not be familiar with it, I'm mentioning the commentary. Also, here you can see Rabbi Elazar added, the souls of the living being, Israel, who are souls of the supernal holy living being, so they come directly from God. So they're almost sort of deifying themselves. Right. And then the other nations who are not souls of the living being, but rather foreskin, as we have said. So racism there. The reference for them praying towards the cherub is here, Barakat 30a. They're speaking about, okay, so if you're, where do you pray? And then if you're in the diaspora, you focus your heart towards the land of Israel. If you're in the land of Israel, towards Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, towards the temple. If you're in the temple, then towards the Holy of Holies. And one who is standing in the Holy of Holies should focus his heart towards the seat of the ark cover, atop the ark, the dwelling place of God's glory. So
this is a very good argument, actually, because the Christians accuse us of facing towards the Kaaba, facing towards towards something, towards Mecca and everything, and they seem not to know this. And many times I've mentioned it to them that this is mentioned in the Jewish scriptures and everything, but because it's not explicitly mentioned. It is actually in the book of Daniel. I think Daniel faces the turns towards Jerusalem and prays and everything. But it's here. It seems to go into it much more deeper.
Yeah, and you can see that they're facing towards the Ark of the Covenant, and the cherub were actually above them. Right. So the place you're facing has these two idols in them.
Right.
Right. Anyway, so before that, we were speaking about racism. So I mentioned the Gentile foreskin and demonic thing. There's one other thing I can go into. So Sanhedrin. Actually, there are other places which mention you can steal from the Gentiles and this and that. I didn't.
Yeah, I've read about that actually. How you can steal from Gentiles, but you're not allowed to steal from a Jew or something.
Yeah. So I didn't put that here, but what I did put it was Sanhedrin 108b, which mentions so. Basically, the people on the Ark of the Covenant were not allowed to have intercourse, but three people violated this decree. They were all punished for it. And one of the people who violated this decree was Ham, the son of Noah. He had relations with a dog. Okay. And his punishment was that he was afflicted in that his skin turned black.
Right.
So essentially,
in another in Arabic is riwayat, but in another story that I've read, one scholar actually mentioned that his son Ham actually had sexual intercourse with his father when his father was drunk, and this is why his father cursed. This is why he cursed the people of Ham.
Yeah. So in the Talmud it says there are three opinions. Number one, either he raped Nuh alayhi salam, he raped Noah and had sodomy with him, or he castrated him,
right?
So he cut off his privates, or he did both,
right?
So yeah, and so his punishment for having intercourse is his skin turning black, which is essentially same dark.
Basically, because now he's claiming that the black people are cursed then.
Yeah, and it's also saying that dark skin is a punishment and it's not good and it's racist.
Right. Interesting.
Female children. So here's another thing I bring up because again, it's mentioned in the Quran, this idea that you should not be preferring males over females and this and that. So Bava Betra 16b, this rabbi has a daughter and he's upset. He didn't have a son. And then his father tries to comfort him by saying saying that essentially she's gonna make babies, right? So more children will be born. And then Bar Kapara says, your father has consoled you with meaningless consolation, as it is taught the world cannot endure without males and females. So basically you need both males and females. So the fact that females have children doesn't mean anything. But fortunate is he whose children are males, and woe to him whose children are females. Similarly, the world cannot endure without either a spice dealer whose wares
we have Brother Charles who's going to be joining us, so I'm just admitting him into the room, and inshallah is a very good brother, alhamdulillah. Brother Charles, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you will benefit from this because this is very good what this brother is giving to us. This is brother proving Islam. I think you mentioned to me, Brother Charles, the other day that you had checked some of his material anyway. So I think he's connecting his audio now. So let's just wait for Brother Charles. Brother Charles, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah. So like I said, you benefit a lot from this brother. I think you mentioned last time that you had been reading some of his, watching some of his stuff. So he's gone through quite a few. This is being recorded, and then we will upload it. So brother approving Islam, brother Ibrahim. This is brother Charles, who I don't know if you've met him if you're online, but he's a new Muslim.
Yeah.
He's a new baby. He's 7 weeks old. So and he has a lot of knowledge of Christianity. So this will help him at all as well. It will help him as well to know a bit more about Judaism as well, which I'm sure he does already. So anyway, brother Charles.
Yes.
Yes. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've had internet issues, but I'm on with my cell phone, so I will do my best with that.
Right. If you need to interject every now and again, if you don't understand something or you want to add something more, I interject the brother every now and again to add more things or to ask questions and everything. So feel free if you need to interject to go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So brother Ibrahim, yes, please carry on.
So we were speaking about female children being worse than male children.
Right.
So what he says is, fortunate is he whose children are males, and woe to him whose children are females. Then they compare it to basically spice dealers versus people whose occupation is tanning. So what they say here is spice dealers, their occupation, so spices are sweet smelling, whereas the tanner, he's engaged in a foul smelling occupation, which is essentially to say people who both males and females are necessary for the world to exist. But having a male is like being a spice dealer because it's all sweet and it's sweet smelling, whereas having a female, it's like being a tanner where you have to deal with foul smelling occupation. So this is sort of bringing females down. And so even if you don't accept this opinion, the point is the Talmud is giving legitimacy to this type of thinking. So a Jew can sort of have this sort of negative attitude towards female children and say, why are you blaming me? My sages were like this, right?
Right. There is a prayer, I think, that the Jew prays every morning, thanking God, praising God that he's not a goy,
Yeah.
and he's not a female, something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There is that.
Right.
In a commentary, it mentions, when the Talmud states, woe to the person whose children are female, the meaning is that it is shameful to have children who allow the physical to dominate them like women. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so now we go on to the image of God is penis. We were speaking about this beforehand.
Right.
But right, so the actual text of this is in, it's Aramaic or Hebrew, but the Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism, Rabbi Jeffrey W. Dennis quotes this. Now, there's actually a passage in the Zohar itself which has the same message, but it would take too long for me to sort of break that down. I do have a video on this where I break down what the Zohar says.
Can I just once again remind the brothers that, if you go to this brother's channel, Proving Islam, and also Brother Charles, who's here, his channel. Brother Charles, can you remind us of your channel, please?
Yes, it's Examine the Word org.
Yes, Examine the Word org. Yeah. So if you go on his channel and on my channel, and you subscribe and like, and you will find more of this. Like I said, the brothers he's kind of compressing it on here, but you'll find it in more detail on his channel there. So anyway, go ahead, brother.
Right. So the rabbi in this book says, Tikkuni Zohar explicitly claims the divine image that God bestowed upon man, but not upon women, is the penis. Volume 162b, 94b, that's the reference in Tikkuni Zohar. The Zohar also interprets a passage from Job, in my flesh I see God, as a reference to the human penis being in the image of God. I break this passage down in my video, but I can't do that here. It would take too long. The point is, is this how you're speaking about Allah? Like, really? Honestly, it's weird. So we're almost at the end. So we just have a couple more things to go to. We'll start with murder. So the divine in the Torah, the punishment for murder is execution. And of course, the rabbis made many excuses for this in the Talmud, and they allowed a lot of murderers to essentially get away with their crimes. So, for example, they mention here that if you push someone into water or fire, and that person could have saved himself from there but failed to do so, the person who pushed him in fire or whatever, he's exempt from the punishment. Similarly, if one set a dog against another and the dog killed him, or if one set a snake against another and the snake killed him, the one who set the dog or snake is exempt from punishment. Even worse, if he embedded the snake's fangs into another and caused the snake to bite him and kill him, he's not punished. He's exempt. It's so weird. So one rabbi here, he says Rabbi Yehuda deems him liable, but the rabbis as a whole exempt him because he didn't directly cause the individual's death. And if you remember, before we spoke about how the rabbis say that whatever the majority of rabbis decide, that is the law, right? So the majority of them decided that even if you get a snake, you put his fangs into another person and you cause that snake to bite you, even then you get no execution.
So one thing here is that these rabbis don't have the, like what we have in Islam. We have the sanad, we have the chain of narrations that, this rabbi could have been a liar, this rabbi could have been like, insane or whatever. So they just take everything that the rabbis are saying there, basically.
Yep. Just take it indiscriminately.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So as you can see here, Sanhedrin.
So they can't turn around and say it's a weak narration, like or fabricated or whatever, like we do with the hadith. So.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Okay. So according to the statement of the rabbis, the venom of snake is discharged by the snake itself. So consequently, the snake is executed by stoning, and the one who caused the snake to bite is exempt from execution. Here it mentions Sanhedrin 77a, if one bound another and he died of starvation, he is exempt from the liability to receive a court-imposed death penalty. So even if you tie someone up, you kidnap someone, you don't give him food, he dies of starvation, you get no execution because, he died of starvation, you didn't kill him, even though you kidnapped him and you tied him up and he died of starvation. It mentions here, if one bound another before a lion, he is exempt from execution, since perhaps the lion will choose not to prey on the victim. It was not his action that caused the damage. So this is murder, essentially. Right? Final thing I brought for this presentation was reincarnation, because this also talks about the sort of the pagan ideas, because of course reincarnation is a very pagan idea. So the passages in the Zohar would speak about this. Again, it would take too long to explain, so I'm just going to go to Chabad.org, a Jewish website, Judaism and Reincarnation, and see what they say. The Holy Ari explained it most simply. Every Jew must fulfill all 613 mitzvot, and if he doesn't succeed in one lifetime, he comes back again and again until he finishes. Exactly like Hinduism. Here, come back and back and back until you are all good, right?
So actual Jews believe in this reincarnation like the Hindus?
Yep. It's also mentioned that many of the early rabbis mentioned it as well. It's not just in the Zohar. So many of the early rabbis believed there was a secret reincarnation as well. And just to speak a little bit more about the Zohar, because I didn't put much stuff here, but just to give you a general idea of some of the things that are mentioned in the Zohar, they actually have a different god, essentially, called Ein Sof. So
yeah, you had mentioned that in one of your talks that you done. I think with was it with brother Khalil?
Yeah.
On Kalamalogy. I thought you would have mentioned that on here as well. I found that very interesting, actually. I thought you'd talk more about it on here, because I wanted to raise this up with the rabbi, and I actually forgot.
The reason I decided to focus more on the Talmud from now on is because with the Kabbalah they just scream mystical and they run away, whereas with the Talmud it's more like you can press them more, right?
Right. So tell me something then. Do all rabbis believe in the Kabbalah or not then?
99.9% of them.
So there's no way they can turn away from it then.
For example.
Right.
Yeah, I had a discussion with him. He affirmed it. He said it's oral Torah. He even has a video where he affirms it. So pretty much everyone you're going to find on the internet believes in it.
So they would believe in this other god that you mentioned, and like I forgot the name of the Ein Sof or something, isn't it?
Yeah. So Ein Sof is like essentially, it's a very mystical sort of, a very philosophical god. So it's a god that it cannot be even explained. That in reality, right. God is this way. That He's so beyond our human comprehension. We can't even understand. We can't even explain. We can't. The way the Bible speaks about God, that stuff does not apply to Ein Sof, because Ein Sof is just so beyond comprehension.
But where do they get this name Ein Sof from? Where do they get this concept from?
it means like nothingness or infinity. So that they say this is the only way through which you can describe him, that he's nothing or that he's infinite, that he cannot be described in any way. That's why they call him Ein Sof.
No, but is that another name that they give to God, or is that another God altogether?
Well, the reason I say it's another God altogether.
I mean, the thing is, we know Allah by the 99 names. We can call Allah Rahman, or Rahim, Al Khaliq, Al Malik. All this we can call Allah. These are still the same Allah. It's not a different God. But now, when you're talking of Ein Sof, and is this another God, or is this just another name that they give to God?
Well, if you look at how the Bible describes God, essentially what they say is none of that applies. And the reality of God is that he's nothing like what the Bible actually says. Actually, he's Ein Sof. Actually, he's nothingness. That the Bible is just using these words. But in reality, the real God is like this completely ununderstandable, unexplainable, sort of infinite sort of being. And so essentially all the attributes of Ein Sof are so different than the Bible, than the biblical God, that it essentially does become a different God. Right? So then you have this sort of idea.
I think what we'll have to do is we'll have to do another session next time where you can explain to me, like you did with Brother Khalil in Kalamology. So if the viewers as well, go to his website, Kalamology, and give him a like as well, and subscribe to his channel, because there are some good things that he's putting out as well. I think I'll have to invite you on next time to go in depth in this other issue that we're just talking about now, because that seems interesting as well. So anyway, carry on.
Right. Yeah. So with Ein Sof, you then have Sfirot. So are the Sfirot God? That's actually a question. And some rabbis said they are God and they're like different separate divine entities. Then other rabbis said, well, if we say that, then
and you've spoken to rabbis about this, yeah?
Yeah. And so essentially what they say is most rabbis today would say they're not God, they're not divine, they're like creations, because what ended up happening is when they started saying they're divine, rabbis said, well, this is exactly like the Trinity. Because yeah, because then you have 10 of these Sfirot, and they're saying all of them are God, but none of them are each other. So then isn't that exactly like the Trinity? So they said that the Trinitarians believe in 3 gods, and these Kabbalists believe in 10. And so there were some passages in the Zohar which do seem to affirm that they are God in some sense. For example, it says that they, meaning the Sfirot, are him. They are him. It says that. I have a video on proof that the Zohar says that the Sfirot are God. Now, again, there's a difference of opinion. We don't have to go too much into that. But the idea is there are indications in the Zohar. For example, it literally says they are him. They, meaning the Sfirot, are God. They are him. So you have these sorts of ideas. So you have these 10 Sfirot, and then you have them interacting with each other. They marry each other. They join with each other. They divorce each other. They separate from each other.
So this is basically like Greek philosophy. I mean, I'm beginning to look at Judaism in a different light after having spoken to you here now, and having watched your video with Brother Khalil, and specifically for tonight, what you've opened up to us here now. I'm beginning to look at Judaism in a totally different light. I mean, I wasn't aware of that, the depth. Remember in the beginning, I mentioned that we know that the shirk was there. We know that the polytheism was there because in the Quran it does mention it. But at what depth we did not know. And now, like, going through all what you've gone through now, I think, like, that has changed my mind completely of what I was thinking of. And I need to look more deeper into this now.
Yeah. So I think we'll essentially leave it there, because, I finished the PowerPoint, and then I gave a sort of a brief summary of what the Kabbalah says. Actually, the interesting thing, they have another one on top of Ein Sof. So Ein Sof isn't even the end. There's another one who's even bigger and greater than Ein Sof. And so the reason I decided not to delve too much into these things is because it's supposed to be more mystical than the Talmud and this and that.
Right, okay.
But yeah, you do have these ideas. And then there's this idea that Shekhinah, you have a Shekhinah, who is the female aspect of God. And she's not God himself, or she's not, how do I say this? She's not like she's not Ein Sof, but she is the female aspect of God. And she's married to another Sephirah. And then they divorce, and then it's
and this is all Judaism, right? We're not talking about another religion right now. We're talking about Judaism.
It's the Kabbalah.
Who they tend to say is monotheistic and Abrahamic or whatever. And now we're talking about gods marrying and then divorcing and whatever. And so we've got a totally different aspect of Judaism, For those who are watching and who didn't know about all this, I'm finding this very, very astonishing. Brother Charles, any comments on this now?
No, other than I definitely am very interested in getting more into this, because this is something, even though I've heard about the Zohar before, because during my conversion or reversion to Islam, when I was leaving Christianity and was looking at Torah Judaism, this is one of the things that the guy that I was watching was against.
Right.
He was basically like an outcast to a lot of the Orthodox Jews, because he did not. The only thing that he would accept, even in the Talmud, was only the descriptions given by the rabbis as far as instructions in the Torah. Right. So all this, the Zohar, he was totally against and stuff like that. And he was pretty much an outcast for doing that.
Right. Yeah, I did mention earlier on to Brother Ibrahim that there are certain Jews that don't believe in the oral tradition at all. They believe only in the Torah, and they would shun the Zohar and the Talmud and the Mishnah and everything. I've forgotten the names. I think the Karaites. I think they're called the Karaites.
You can essentially say to them just how Unitarian Christians are completely shunned, right?
Yeah.
That's the sort of pressure that's put on Jews who reject the oral. But even then, again, I discussed the problem with rejecting all that is then you're left with books that you don't know who authored them, because where do we get that Moses is the one who wrote the first 5 books, this person wrote this prophet wrote this? That all comes from their sages. Right. So if you reject their sages, which you should, and we have good reason to, problem is we don't know who authored these books. Also, we don't know the vowel pointings. So you can read the text in many, many different ways, and you don't know who authored the books, and you don't really know what the books say anymore.
This is like the Quranists then, who reject the hadith and then obviously be totally lost.
Yeah. So if you reject the Islamic tradition, how do you know what the vowel pointings are?
Yes.
It's the exact same problem. So
right. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have been sending prophets to them if they were not lost. But then I didn't know how lost they were. Now this is opening up a bit another front for me, because now when you look at the Quran now and you read the Quran and you read about how the Jews, and you read of the anger of Allah against the Jews, and how and we get questioned by Christians. We get questioned by Christians that Allah is angry and then stuff like that and whatever So we can see the reason now. We can see the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was angry with them, because of the fact that when you see the things that they delved into, So I thank Brother Ibrahim a lot for having brought this to us, and inshallah we will arrange with him some other time. We will have another stream where actually we can go more in depth into what about this. Jazakallah khair for watching.
Can I say my
yeah.
Because there's one thing I remember that I can bring up that I didn't make a video about yet, but it's cool. It's cool to see. But again, my channel is Proving Islam. You just look me up there. I'm sure you'll find me, because I have enough subscribers now. It's where you can just look me up. I talk a lot about Judaism, but a lot of earlier videos about other topics as well. One other thing that I just thought about right now, it'd be cool to bring up, is that they actually in the Talmud make excuses for the golden calf and Baal. So they say that actually the golden calf was God's fault. It wasn't even Israel's fault.
Right.
And it then says that God, basically that, God, because it was golden, and it's like, well, how are we to blame when you tempted us with all this gold? And then Moses is arguing with God like this, and then it says, I'll put the narrations later on when I edit, but it says that God conceded to Moses that he was right, that the golden calf was God's fault, not even the Israelites. And then also the same thing is done with Baal. So you know how during the time of Elijah, they started worshiping Baal. It says that Rabbi Eliezer said that Elijah spoke impertinently towards God on high, as well in his prayer at Mount Carmel, as it is stated, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, that this people will know that you are the Lord God, and you have turned their hearts backwards," claiming that God caused Israel to sin. On this topic, this rabbi said, "From where do we know that the Holy One, blessed be He, ultimately conceded to Elijah that he was correct?" And then they mentioned the verse that shows that according to them that God conceded to Elijah that it was God who caused Israel to worship Baal, and it was not really Israel's fault as much.
This is interesting because when I speak to a lot of Christians and they talk about Shaitan's discourse with God, they mention that actually it was God's fault. They actually agree it was God's fault. He was the one who misguided them, Satan. He was the one who, make Satan act the way he was and everything. I was very surprised because I had a discussion with a Christian, and he actually is not blaming Satan for being evil, but he's blaming Allah. He's blaming God and he was like an advocate for Satan actually. So it's very interesting that you've gone over this as well. And like I said, Jazakallah khair. And brother Charles, do you want to add in some input before we finish the show?
No, I apologize for missing so much of it because what I've heard so far is amazing to me.
Yeah. But obviously, it's being recorded and it's going to be uploaded, so you'll be able to catch the full details. Another thing as well is that I like to mention, which is interesting, is that brother Kenny is actually working on I think the ancient Eastern text, which actually the Bible takes from. And it's very interesting because he talks about the what do you call it, the Ugaritic text and everything.
Ugaritic text.
Yeah, Ugaritic text, and this seems very interesting as well because now in there, you will have a different aspect as well. And I'm waiting for when brother Kenny actually. Kenny Boma, brother Kenny Boma from our network channel, which is Consider This TV. We have a network together, and we're all when we broadcast on one channel, we broadcast on the others. So he's actually working on this now, and something very interesting because now it brings us into a different content. Because if there was going to be what do you call it? Polytheism, then obviously, a lot of it must have been taken as well from the ancient texts and everything. So when you combine this with what this brother has given us now, this is going to be very interesting. I mean, I'm looking forward to what brother Kenny Boma has to bring out as well. And inshallah, once he's done. I think we've arranged that we're going to talk about it some other time. So if you go to his channel as well and you give him a subscribe and like, and on my channel as well, you will see the recommended channels. All the channels that are on there recommended. If you go and you give us a like and subscribe, and then obviously we will be bringing more material to you and. Inshallah. And I'm going to be inviting brother Ibrahim. Definitely, I'm going to be inviting him again on my channel because the material that he has brought to us is very, very interesting. I have learned a lot, and I'm sure that the viewers will have learned a lot as well from it. Those who don't know much about Judaism, those who used to think that Judaism was very polytheistic and whatever, and very close to Islam or whatever, this has changed our views completely now. And Jazakallah khairan. So I think we can close the session here, and Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.